Come on, let's go. All right. So this video is going to be somewhat of a movie review of the biopic Michael starring Jafar Jackson. And what I intend to communicate is something that might not connect with a lot of people, but I felt it was important to put together just because of my experience of the film, but not only my experience of the film, but witnessing what our world does when people hold a consciousness that we are not attuned to, and how we first worship them and then we want to destroy them, and how sometimes when people dedicate their energy to bringing the world together, the people or the forces who survive off of tearing the world apart then try to destroy those people. And as a little bit of an indication of what I'm talking about, we'll think about people like, well, uh, I won't even start with the number one person. I'll start with Martin Luther King Jr. and how he was the most hated man in America, but what he wanted to do was bring people together across all of our differences. Dead. Then we talk about Malcolm X, who, when he was preaching division, he was still alive. As soon as he started saying, you know what, let's just all work together, unalived. Do you get what I'm saying? And then we can go back to the person, the consciousness, Yehoshua, they call him Jesus. And I'm not comparing Michael to these characters or these figures in the sense that I'm trying to hold him to some different standard. But what I'm trying to say is that we have a tendency in our world to decimate people who come about unity. And we usually tend to kind of draw from those people, draw their energy and all those other things, and kind of look at them as a transactional kind of relationship. Like, what can we get from those people? And those people sometimes feel like they have to give everything they have to the people that they're trying to serve, to the point where they lose themselves and they already start to die before they even die. That's why Malcolm X said that he lived as a man who was already dead, because he had dedicated himself to an ideal and then knew that the world wasn't ready for the ideal he dedicated himself to. And so he had to live as if he was already dead, because he knew that if he kept living as himself, eventually that was going to get him killed. And I know some people don't know much about Malcolm X. They don't know about El Hajj Malik El Shabazz and who he was after Hajj. I'm not going to get into all of that right now, but what I will do is just acknowledge that we have a tendency to destroy people who are about unity. And it's on either side, too. It's not just the one side that person's supposed to be on, or the other side. It's when people, just what same thing happened with Martin Luther King Jr. too. Like, it wasn't just like only white people hated him, black people hated him too. So there's this moment where people who thrive in the space of division will tear people apart. And I'll drop off of that and just get back to the review. So I saw the movie last night with my family. And first of all, just from a performance standpoint, I have to say that Jackson, man, he did an amazing job. It was more than a portrayal. It was an embodiment. There was literally times where I thought I forgot that I wasn't watching Michael Jackson, and that's the truth. There were moments where he was expressing himself in the embodiment of Michael, and the intonations, everything. And some of the things that even when some of the performances that I had seen on video and stuff before, so many times that my brain kind of had a sense of, timing and all stuff like that. He had so many of those things on lock. The directors, the writers, the people who were originally a part of Michael's choreography team, and all of those people did an impeccable job of recreating the performances. And then Jafar did an impeccable job of recreating, or I think recreating might be a good word, because he really embodied his uncle. It was phenomenal. And Coleman Domingo, he crushed it as Joe Jackson. And he actually, if you really paid attention to the nuances of his behavior, he did a good job of making you feel like you wanted to understand why he was the way he was, even though the way he was abusive to Michael. It was almost like Killmonger from Black Panther. It was like you knew he was the antagonist, but a part of you understood why he was the way that he was. if you're a black person, I guess I'll say, trying to make it in this world. And I don't negate that he was abusive and transactional, but he also had this thing where he was trying to hold his family together and making one person couldn't leave the family because he was trying to hold together a family system, and he thought that that was his job to do, and that he was going to take them to the stratosphere. And just like you've seen with a lot of fathers like Serena and Venus Williams' dad, or some other people like that, that hi Ellison, that those people hold their children to an incredibly high standard, especially as black kids growing up in this country trying to excel. And the fathers were usually men who never got the chance to achieve their dreams, and so they projected them onto their kids and then pushed their kid to hit to that level. And it's painful for the kids. Obviously, they experienced it as abuse and neglect and some other things. And at the same time, I think that it's an interesting dynamic that a lot of times parents do push their visions, their unaccomplished dreams or whatever on the kid because they were stopped by some force. And then they say, well, my kid's not going to be stopped. And when they see their kid um, holding back, they push harder. And then eventually they push him away, unfortunately. And that's what happened in the film. That's what happened in the story. So there's some things that I really want to talk about. And I said from an esoteric perspective, I've been talking about the wounded healer a lot lately. And if anybody embodied the wounded healer archetype, it was definitely Michael Jackson. Even if you don't know his story, just from what you see in the film, you can see, without giving too many spoilers, it's his life. You could look all this up even if you never watched the movie. But basically, there was something he loved, which was singing and dancing and music. And then his father saw the possibility of them. His dad was kind of like a failed musician, and he saw the possibility of his kids living out his dream, and he pushed Michael super hard. And that's kind of where the movie starts. Initially, Michael wasn't supposed to be one of the lead singers in the Jackson Five. It just, they saw that he had this in him. The movie just kind of starts off with him already in it, but he was not originally supposed to be the lead singer because he was a little kid. But then he just had that talent. Now, there's some things that I'm going to say that may seem a little bit um, never talked about before, but I do think that there was a chance that Michael Jackson may have been on the spectrum, perhaps autistic, but somewhere on the spectrum. And I honestly don't really get into this much, but technically I'm on the spectrum, and I notice it in people very easily. And when I saw Michael's behavior, even as a kid, I knew that there was something there. When I was a kid, I mean. And in the movie, even though they never said it, you could see that there were the different elements of the film where he couldn't sit still. There's a lot of different things that I'm not going to get into, but I just have a sense that he was somewhere on the spectrum. So he had to deal with a lot for them to get him to conform. And if you know anything about the term Asperger's, for Asperger syndrome, that was because this doctor, I guess you want to call him that, Asperger, um, identified certain autistic people on the spectrum that he thought could be trained into being good Nazis, but they needed a little bit more effort to conform to the society or the systems that they were trying to create. And he called those people called Asperger's. Anybody on the lower end of that, they would get rid of in that Nazi Germany. So the reason why I bring that up is I think that sometimes there's some people who they operate on a spectrum, but they're able through imitation or through pressure or whatever to conform to a system or a family system or some kind of arrangement. And I feel like Michael was able to do that, or not able to, forced to, and then he did. But if you paid attention to the way he was with music and the way that they portrayed in the film, I mean, he was music. It wasn't just that he listened to music. It wasn't just that he sang music. He was music. He was an instrument. He was a channel, which they use that term in the film. He was a channel for a way of a frequency, let's say, that he vibrated at, that was a unified frequency. He was able to pull sound from all sorts of things. It wasn't just like the music and the things that were played. He heard them in his head completely in songs, and he knew exactly what they sounded like in their full expression. And then he felt responsible for bringing them into the world. And even when he made little all this other stuff like that, a Shimon, a hee hee, or ow, ho, and all those other different sounds that he made. And even in interviews, you can say that they say, well, why do you do this with your body? And he would be like, that's what the music does. I think that he was so tapped into it that he became the music. His body surrendered to it. He was in flow, like Chick High. I can't remember the guy's name, but this one guy talks about flow. I think he lived in a near perpetual state of flow and tried his best to stay in it. And that is something that this world is not down for. And so not only was his father trying to get him to perform and conform, but lots of other people were too, which is portrayed in the film. I think a lot of reviewers who say negative things about the film don't actually understand the story of the film. They went in there with an expectation of what they wanted to see, and they did not go in there to actually experience the film as it is. And I, as an artist myself, I can't stand it when a person who's a critic projects their own idea of what they want to see onto something, and then when it doesn't match their own projection, they feel entitled enough to say that the project failed at its aim. I don't think that this project failed at its aim at all. I think that it was telling a story from his younger self to 1988 for different restrictions and different things, but that's what it was to do. And it was positioning him becoming his own person, becoming the man in the mirror that his later album, had that song on. He was becoming that. And this was a story of his becoming his own person, looking himself in the mirror and choosing the life that he wanted to live. And that's what the film did. And it talked about the tensions and the stresses and the other things that happened in his life, all building up to something else. And a lot of the reviewers, I think they missed that. But back to the wounded healer, I think that Michael felt a complete responsibility. He didn't see his fans as just these people outside of himself. He saw them as an extension of his family, just like he saw his animals as his friends. And I think that in so many ways, through his relationship to his fandom, he saw them as an extension of his family. And because of the way he was conditioned in his family, his biological family, where he was supposed to give everything he had to it, then chose to give everything he had to his fans. He felt like a responsibility that he had to become accessible. He had to become whatever he had to become to bridge these gaps, bridge these divides, and hold these tensions in his body. And I think that he was so tapped into that he didn't have the rootedness and the groundedness, maybe in like his root chakra or something like that, that he was able to both hold himself together and give himself to people. So he just kind of gave himself in that kind of way. I think that he was living beyond language. That even though he used words and articulated these things, these vibrations, these ideas, these visions of a whole and healed world, that he kept going more and more toward. I think that it wasn't just like the words he was using, it was the way what the word symbolized, along with other vibrations and resonance that made him just try to embody the the literal articulation of unity, oneness, and wholeness of all humanity, and also the pain that he was articulating of not being able to realize that, but going toward that and giving himself to that. And then he started, as he matured and started to be able to kind of see the systems that were in place that were keeping people from living more fully into the highest levels of who they could be and their healing and things like that. He then came out against those things in the best way that he can. Also, I think that he tapped into, like, I am now part of this community called Unity, and they talk about these 12 powers of humanity, or 12 powers of, yeah, I'll say 12 powers of humanity. It's 12 powers of man, but modern times 12 powers of humanity, which are like imagination, will, zeal, love, understanding, things like that. I think that he really connected with a lot of the powers that we all have as humans, and he tried to access them as much as he possibly could. And he really was connected to his power of understanding, his power of love, his power of imagination, his power of will, his power of zeal. And he was tapping into those in a very spiritual way and trying to live them at his highest possibility. And I mean, I don't know what you've done with your life, anybody who watches this later, but I can tell you that a lot of times in our world, when people try to hold themselves to those kinds of high standards, a lot of people pull them down. There's like this crab in the bucket theory. But I remember when I was younger, I actually used to work landscaping. And when I first got hired, they said, you have to, your job is to clean all the things around this building and blah, 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 blah. So I went at it. And I was like, just cleaning, cleaning, cleaning. Took my little break, went back, cleaning, cleaning, cleaning. And then the other landscapers came to me and they said, Pedro, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? I said, I'm doing my job. And they said, no, you're making all of us look bad. And I said, how am I making y'all look bad? And they said, You're doing too much work, man. You're working too hard. You're cleaning too many. You're cleaning around too many houses. And before you came here, they only thought we could do like 3 buildings a day. You're doing three in the morning before before we even go to lunch break. You're doing three by yourself. And it's like, and if you do that, you're messing it up for the rest of us. And I had a hard time with that. I'm not gonna lie. So I made a deal with them that I would do buildings way far on the other end of the complex where the supervisor and stuff would not look, and because I needed to do my best and they needed to be lazy as hell. So whatever the case may be, but I'm bringing that up to say that when people hold themselves to such a high standard, there's something in the system that says, man, we got to pull you back to earth. You cannot hold this standard at this level so consistently. We had to destroy you somehow, some way. And that is, especially as a black man, which, yeah, he turned white before he died. But I think that I do believe that he had like vitiligo. I know people with vitiligo. I know somebody that I met them and thought they were white and they were Indian and had complete vitiligo to the degree that you thought they were a white person almost. So I definitely, and my uncle had vitiligo pretty bad. By the time he died, he was my complexion. And by the time he died, he was like almost a white dude. So like all over his body, he barely had any brown splotches left. So I definitely think that that contributed to it, in addition to some other issues that he might have had trying to fully embody the reality of who he was, that also probably had a hard time with a black person being at that level. I can't imagine how some races felt to see the greatest star on earth be a black dude. You know what I mean? I had to be messing him up. And that probably messed up Michael too because of the unity consciousness that he was trying to hold on to. And so I think that if you watch the film and you look at it from that perspective of what he was trying to hold together inside of himself, and how each scene kind of showed how his unfolding awareness of a responsibility for bringing people together, to healing the world, to healing children and all sorts of like that. And I know people have lots of, I mean, I can't say he didn't do anything because I wasn't there. I can say that it does not, to me, it seems like he was operating from a childhood innocence, and he was really trying to just stay there. And, you know, the Bible says that you're supposed to enter, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven without the mind of a child. You're supposed to have that kind of consciousness. And he was a deeply spiritual person who I believe was taking some of that stuff to a literal level. And he, for one reason or other, he tried to connect to innocence. So that's why he went and saw sick people. He took care of animals and he hung out with kids, because that's the energy he was trying to stay in. That's the vibration. And that's the people to whom I think he increasingly felt responsibility. Because you see a lot of these old MFs that are stuck in their stupid ways, you probably do want to hang around young people that have some more awareness and possibility and stuff like that, because sometimes it's too late for some of these a-holes. So I don't know. You know, I could find out that he did stuff. I don't know. And I know people say things and people say other things. What I do know is he did not seem to be that type of person. He seemed to be a person that was operating at a high level of innocence. And I do think he was on the spectrum, and that there were some things that he did not see the world the way other people did. And he wanted to live his life. And there was a lot of um, kind of, I can't think, like planted little seeds of how he wanted to live his life, his true life. And I can tell you as a person, I want to live my true life. I've like walked away from things, changed things, quit jobs, everything, because I just wanted to be the person that I knew that I was in my heart. And if I was in a system that was trying to keep me, I felt was keeping me from being my fullest self, for whatever reason, I walked away from it. And some people might not make their choices, but as a person who's made that choice, I can imagine him being that type of person, saying, I don't want to have parts of this other broken down system. I also think that he gave himself to a degree that he almost was like took his body for granted. Because if you hear interviews and stuff like that, he pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed as if his body had no limits. And I think that he did that because he was operating from like more from his heart and his mind, and then took his body to a place where he negated it or neglected it, not in a like well, he also got, you know, addicted to the pain meds and different things like that. But I think that part of him getting to that, because he kept feeling like he had to push, and so if he hit a limitation, then he probably just kind of pushed past that. And it also makes me think to some degree that he might have been a 7 on the Enneagram, which some people kind of call that the Peter Pan kind of mentality, where they're stuck in like trying to be in joy and fun. And if they have something that pushes them away from that, they can go to a more aggressive 8 type, which is what I am. But I think to some degree he might have been operating from that paradigm. And sevens hate having limits put upon them. And sevens, unfortunately, a lot of times are the people more inclined to get addicted to some kind of substance because they don't like the feeling of being put at a limit to some degree. So just a little thing to throw out there if you're thinking about the movie or thinking about the life of this person. But this, all these things I'm saying is like, if you watch the movie after this, I want you to think about these things. If you already saw the movie and you're reflecting on it, I'm inviting you to reflect on those things. So yeah, I think that he neglected his body, pushed himself to try to take his body to a level that his body was going to probably break down eventually from the degree that he pushed it. But I think he did it because he thought he had to. I also think that he broke free from time, because I always thought about all the people artists that came up when he did originally. He kept transforming and holding himself in this like high vibrational standard that transcended time, and he kept just going up and up and up and up and up and up. And he was like the artist for every time that he was in before his like kind of downfall or whatever. He was the artist for the time that he was in. He didn't get stuck in the 60s, stuck in the 70s, stuck in the 80s, stuck in the 90s. He kept transforming and staying consistent from a place of like pure presence, that time seemed to collapse and unfold around him, so that he held the standard of that vibration for the time he was in. So he wasn't operating in a linear perspective. And even the way that he pulled in like the songs and stuff like that is like I said, it was like 100% from way he expressed himself in interviews and stuff. He heard the whole songs complete. And I know when I write poetry, I sometimes hear the whole poem in my head, and I'm able to just write it down like somebody's dictating it to me. And even with songs, I'm just not instrumentally inclined. So a lot of times I have to wait for somebody else to help me with the music part. But now there's AI and I probably could use that. I did that a couple times and even bought a program. That's a tangent. But even when I did that, I say that to say that I could hear the whole songs in my head. Like I wrote this song when somebody called my daughter not an N-word. And in my head I heard dum 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 dum. And I was like, what? Even though I was bothered with them calling us the N-word. And I wrote a song called Now I'm Gonna Get Angry, which is an acronym for NIGGA. And I heard the whole thing flow through my mind. And just like, and I was like, why am I having this song that's supposed to be angry, but the sound in my head, it was like a happy sounding song. And I actually made it, and I'll probably put it out one of these days. I put it on YouTube, but I may put it out. But that's all to say that I've even had the experience of whole songs coming into my mind, and then I don't have like the musical ability to channel it the way that he did. But I think that he was able to do that because he was not trapped in linearity. So he could experience whole present things fully realized. Because most things in life, they have to go through a cycle of time. In order, time is, like I said in a previous video, or actually a video is coming out tomorrow. Time is the biggest recipe in all things in creation. Like if you bake a pie or whatever the case may be, it takes time to bake the pie. It takes time to put the ingredients together. And then when you put it in the oven, it takes time for it to bake and time for it to cool. Nothing is complete without going through the passage of time. But when you operate at a certain frequency, you can collapse time into shorter segments because the frequency is the inverse of time. So the higher the frequency, the shorter the time. So I think that Michael was able to vibrate at such a high frequency that time collapsed when he was in his creative process. And so he was able to do that in a way that a lot of us can't do and aren't able to relate to. But I think the film was showing his ability to do that. And if you're paying attention to it from that perspective, you'll witness it. Well, not everybody, because some people just don't think that way. Some people just think in very kind of like low transactional ways. They won't understand this video, and they definitely won't understand his way of being. They'll just be like, no offense to them, I'm just saying that's not how some people just don't function that way. They're so polarized and so in division that they cannot see unified fields of awareness or energy or any of the things that I'm saying. And I'm not saying it as a put down. I'm not saying, I'm just saying it is like speaking a different language. So for those of you who can speak this language or something like that, this may make some sense to you. And then I guess the final thing I want to say is that like a lot of times when you see figures like this, they have this kind of like culmination of their artwork, and sometimes their whole life is an artwork. Because I think about it, like even though it would have been cool if Michael Jackson like lived to be an old dude and could go watch the premiere of this movie and didn't have drama in his life and all that stuff like that, the human stories kind of end that way. It's like if you imagine Michael being like 70 years old, it probably would just be kind of like weird for some reason. So it's like, even though it's sad that he died, it also, I just can't imagine him living past 50, sadly. Same with like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. It's like if they lived to be old people, something felt off about it. It's like for some reason, when people impact the world like that, it just seems like they just got to die early. I don't know what that's about, but I think maybe this world just can't stand people holding energy like that too long, because it holds all of us to a higher standard. And we're like, F that. You can hold me to no standard, die. So I don't know. That's why I try to like come in and out of my vibrations. So like they won't take my ass out. But man, maybe someone will. But at any rate, the point is, I think that he embodied an archetype that's consistent throughout time, where people come in, they drop some genius into this world, and then this world gets to a point where they're just like, screw you, and you got to go make room for somebody else, and they kick them to the curb. And the last thing I'll say actually is something that's very strange, and I'm now going to share this publicly. I shared it with a couple people in my life. My dad died a month to the day before Michael Jackson. And when I was a kid, I used to always tell my dad, dude, you kind of remind me like a mix between Michael Jackson and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's an interesting combo. But my dad was like that. And it might have been his accent. And my dad used to be pretty big and he, fight and stuff like that. And he also liked a little dance or whatever. I don't know what it was about this dude, but he reminded me of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Michael Jackson put together. And when my dad died, it was weird. I felt like, oh, dang, my dad's dead. It seems like Michael Jackson wouldn't be in the world much longer either. Isn't that a weird thought? But I had it anyway. And so a month to the day that my dad died, I was driving this pickup truck that he had left me. And I was picking it up from my stepmom and driving. And then my friend called me and said, did you hear the news? I said, what's that? She was like, Michael Jackson's dead. And I was like, dang. And it was weird because my brain thought, now that my dad's gone, felt like weird for Michael Jackson to exist in the world with my dad not in the world. It's a dumb, weird thing. I can't explain it, but it happened. So I had this thought. Michael Jackson dies. Maybe about 2 or 3 days after Michael Jackson died, I had a dream that I was in. I don't want to call it heaven so much, but I was definitely in some other realm, let's just say, in this dream. And my dad, for like months and months after my dad died, he would come in my dreams, to the point where I actually fussed at my dad in my dreams, saying, dude, you got to stop showing up in my dreams, man, and just go be dead. Like, and I know that sounds weird to say, but I actually had to say it to my dad, because I kept almost every other night, if not every night for a while, my dad was popping up in my dreams. And I was like, and it could be my brain. I'm not saying it was literally him. I'm just saying that it was conjuring in my mind. And I got to a point where I was like, dude, get out of here. Any rate, so in this dream, I see my dad. I'm talking to him. This is before I kicked him out of my dream world. And I'm hanging out with him, and he's showing me around in this like kind of like Egyptian type place. And but not like Remember the Time, when Michael Jackson's video, that Remember the Time video, which is kind of in Egypt, but that kind of thing. And I was just walking around. He was showing me stuff, and I was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool," or whatever. And then he said, "You want us to meet somebody?" I said, "Who?" He said, "Michael Jackson." And I said, "He's here?" And he said, "Yeah, come here. I'll show you." So he went to take me to meet Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson was just dancing about 6 inches above the ground, and I could still to this day see the moves he was doing. And it was like he was freaking lated, because the limitations of gravity that had on him when he was on the earth had like kind of bothered him to some degree. And so he had learned in this new realm how he could dance without the limitations on gravity. And he was it's like just dancing, dancing. And I asked my dad, have you ever talked to him? He said, oh man, he doesn't talk to anybody. And I said, really? And he said, no. He said, all he does is dance all day long, never stops. He just dances, 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 dances. That's all he does. And then I was like, dang, okay. And I couldn't make any sense of it, just what he did. And then all of a sudden, I saw two people show up on either side of him. One of them was Janet Jackson, and the other one was one of his other sisters. I don't know if it was Rebe, but they showed up next to him. And then I said, "Oh my God, did Janet Jackson just die too?" And then he said, "No, she's dancing on Earth." And he was like, and she's basically in the zone now. She's like in such a flow that a part of her consciousness is both here and there at the same time. And when she comes down from it, you won't see her here anymore. But when people get into the flow, they exist here and on Earth at the same time. And I was like, "What? That's crazy." And then I said, "Oh, that's cool." And I said, "Well, do you think I'll see you again here?" And he told me, "Yeah, maybe one of these days." I said, "Do you think my siblings will ever visit you here?" And he was like, "Doubt it. Sorry, siblings." Anyway, I'm not saying I was special. I was just a freaking dream. But the point was that I felt like whether it was my mind making it up or whether it was something more inexplicable than that, it was this notion that there is a state of consciousness, a high vibrational frequency that transcends time, transcends space, can be at the highest level of imagination, transcend limitations, and anybody can tap into it at any point in time. And I think that Michael Jackson got to the point where he tapped into it. This world wasn't able to hold him being in that vibration. And so it started to reject him. And then now, whatever his consciousness is now doing, whatever it's doing, dancing all over the universe, perhaps. But I also think that it tells us something about our highest potentials, that if we can allow ourselves to be channels of unified awareness or oneness or whatever the case may be, that we can tap into the very things that he tapped into in the areas that we're supposed to be blessings in. And it might not be in the greatest pop star on earth or whatever the case may be. It may be sewing something. It may be doing somebody's taxes. It could be walking dogs. It could be anything that you tap into that is bringing you into a full state of presence and state of flow and be able to resonate with the vibration that I think Michael Jackson hung out in as long as he possibly could. And I think that if you're going to watch this movie, don't just look at it as a story of somebody else outside of you that accomplished some great things and looking for a drama or whatever in the movie that you wish was there because you want to feel negative feelings towards somebody because it makes you feel better about yourself. But instead to watch it and look at it as about a person trying to connect to their highest potential, to being a wounded healer, to try to take and make meaning of the tragedies in their lives and try to give it to others. Because ultimately, I think what he was trying to do is something similar that a lot of us try to do, which is we either try to hide from the pains of our life or we try to redeem them through our giving. And I think that he struggled and suffered and was wounded in his own ways and had his joy coupled with pain. And then he tried his best to transcend that pain. And he tried to become a father to the world that he never had, to try to give the childhood to other people that he never had, because he was trying to give what was missing in his life. And a lot of times when we do that, when we expose our vulnerabilities and give what we have, or give what we wish we had to the world, it actually we become wounded healers ourselves and we become blessings. But we also have to remember that we were always worthy of the love that we aspire to. And I think that maybe he missed that piece, that he wanted to love and love and love, but didn't realize how worthy of love he was. And he tried to receive it. And then when people, turned on him, rejected him, tried to betray him, I think it freaking devastated him. And that's very sad, just like a child. And so, all that to say, it's more than just a movie review. It's basically a way of viewing the movie. And so, if you have viewed it, I invite you to review it in your mind uh, from this perspective. Is this something that interests you? And look at it from a perspective again of trying to live into our highest human potential and looking at the struggles and the archetypes and the other things um, of people who try to live from their highest potential and see where you connect to it. And I don't know, you can kind of see it as an example. So I guess that's it. I felt it was important for me to make this video because I saw a lot of people, I felt they were really missing the point of the film first and foremost. And I also saw that, like, this is my last thing. I've seen a lot of biopics. Only two times have I watched a biopic and started forgetting that I wasn't watching the actual person that the film was about, and that was with Ray and with Michael. Other ones were good that I've watched, but with Ray and Michael, both times I started forgetting that I wasn't looking at the actual person themselves. So kudos to those actors that were able to pull that off. Tom Hanks did a good job on Mr. Rogers too. But at any rate, um, with this biopic, I think that a lot of the critics are being unjust because they're expecting something from the movie that was not, you couldn't accomplish in 2 hours, and it was in the time frame of the film. And there's plenty of films that only cover certain segment of a person's life, and they weren't as critical of those as they are of him. I'll just leave it at that. All right, thank you for watching this, either now or later. And I hope that it adds some value to your life, not just about the movie, but just yourself tapping into your highest potential, being witness to the frequencies and the things that you're capable of when you allow yourself to be channels of blessing and to live your life from the most present place possible, and yada, 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 yada. So anyway, love y'all. Take care.